I thought you got a haircut then.
No, not really. Not actual haircut. It's just that my hair is getting to the length where it really can't get into the back, and it's in the middle length, so it's really annoying. So I'm just trying to battle with it until it actually reaches the right length. So.
So how does it sound on this? Is it okay?
Yes, the sound is perfect, as I said. There's nothing wrong with of course the cutout is something we can't really do much about. That's when there's junk on the line, so. But yeah, I've been looking through the material from last session, and it was a lot of inspiring stuff and really a lot of things to think about and put into a nice context. So
good. Are you going to have like music and stuff on the beginning and stuff like that?
I'm gonna put something in the beginning, and I'm gonna see if I can't make sort of like a small intro thing, and then when we've written the whole narrative, I'm gonna send it by you so you can look it over, including a sort of a script and a storyboard.
What about when you use movie clips? Is there copyright issues, or
no,
get out 10 seconds?
Fair use is 2 minutes.
It's copyright free. That's quite a lot when you think about it.
Yes, it is. You can really do a lot, especially with getting context from the clips and stuff. So that's really useful. And since this material itself will be it'll be Creative Commons, so it'll be the same thing. It's not. No. Any products we make, of course, at some point we might start to have some bigger productions where it might warrant some sort of reselling of the material if there's an interest. But we believe that these things need to be shared freely, because there's just so much information and so much valuable stuff from creative people and writers and artists that trying to limit it is really not to the benefit of the creative people.
And technology makes it so easy now, so why not?
Yeah, and I usually use the argument that, well, if this technology had been available back when people like Terence McKenna and Buckminster Fuller and all these people were alive, we would have been able to get a lot more on tape, and it would be impossible to put a value on that today, right?
Yeah, it's so sad how little Terence McKenna there is.
Yeah, and I think everyone out there has finished all the material and just sit there and say, oh, who's going to be the next Terence McKenna, because we really need a new one. I think someone like Nassim Haramein is somewhere in that direction, but very much focused on his physics these days. So
yeah.
But a lot of things are going to come from that, I think. I was actually about to mention there's a video with his wife giving birth, natural birth, and it's one of the few live births where there's an orgasm involved. Well, it's just worth thinking about, really.
Intense.
Yeah, and it's out there on the web. You can find it. It's just Haramein and orgasm. Then you will find his wife giving birth. It's very special and very intense. It's like, oh my god, I didn't know that happened. So a lot of stuff is coming from those sources. Well, I wanted to see if we could touch upon two things in this interview. I would like to take you back to presenting some of the more basic stuff, some of the personal experiences, and some of the warning signs and ways of identification. Because I think a few of the times that you've done interviews, you kind of skip through them with a speed where I don't think people get the chance to actually think, oh, is that something that I've actually experienced? And I know that there's all the contents in the book, but to get your personal view and maybe some examples of how to actually identify a psychopath and what to look for to figure out if they are not.
Sure. Okay, want to start now?
Yeah.
So I'll just start with combat that then.
I would like you to just pick up wherever you feel it's natural.
Okay. Identifying a psychopath it's like a double-edged sword. You have to, you have to be careful that you don't, cut yourself on the blade, because you could very well be identifying or tagging a person who is not a psychopath with this name, and this is it's wrong on an awful lot of levels. You're violating this person's civil rights to begin with, because it's a very serious thing to call a person or tag this person a psychopath. It's wrong because it will allow genuine psychopaths to escape detection, because what happens is the whole intensity of the psychopathic experience within society becomes watered down. And what happens then is that you'll have basically a situation developing where psychopathology will be considered a normal condition, and something we should accept, and something we should not accept, because there's not a level playing field in this situation. The psychopath is a clandestine predator. The psychopath is below the radar, and because of its chameleon nature, you don't know it's a psychopath until what we would call the reveal. Would be probably the best way of putting it. And they don't come out and actually tell you that they're a psychopath. Sometimes they do, but not if they're manipulating, not if they find you useful. But when they make the reveal, or they come out of the closet, pathologically speaking, you know it, because it's like nothing you've ever experienced in your life. So I would caution people to not declare anyone a psychopath that they're not in a long-term personal contact with.
How do you make yourself sure that you're not making false positives? What would a false positive look like? What could you look for in someone that you might have suspected for being a psychopath that would negate the diagnosis?
Well, you could have a situation where you may have somebody who may demonstrate some of the actual pathology because of a medical condition, and I'll give you, like in the case of a female psychopath, you might be dealing with a woman who has something like polycystic ovary syndrome, which is these cysts that grow on the ovaries, and they cause an excess production of testosterone in females. And this has some pretty bad behavioral consequences for them, and it makes them aggressive and impulsive. And they very often, the combination of the high testosterone from the polycystic ovary syndrome, coupled with their behavior in the workplace or even in a relationship, may cause somebody to call that woman a female psychopath. But unless you know her medical history, you can't really. So, but the thing is that a woman, even with polycystic ovary syndrome, who has these aggressive, impulsive behaviors, they still have the ability to feel redemption and to feel remorse and to make up for what they've done and sincerely mean it. They will often go into pretty difficult periods of depression following their behavior, because they cannot talk to the people whom they've damaged. They can't rationalize it, but they want to. So I would say that that's it. That really gives you an insight into who's not a psychopath. I got an email from a guy today, and he told me, I think I'm a psychopath. And then he went on to say how he's, he's cheated on every woman he's ever known, and that he's he's very driven. And after hearing my recent interview on Red Ice Radio, he feels really bad about himself and wants to know what he can do to to integrate better in society and not be a psychopath. Now, right off the bat, I know that guy is not a psychopath because he feels guilt about it. He doesn't want to be that way. Where your average psychopath, well, all your psychopaths, they never ever want to change. They're perfect. This is one of the great misunderstandings of the pathology, that somehow psychopaths are they're tortured inside by their behavior. They're absolutely not. They actually enjoy it. If you ask most of them, and I have asked several of them, if you could not be a psychopath, would you not be one? And they say, no, I absolutely love being a psychopath. I'm feral, I'm free, and I can do whatever I want without consequence. And so as soon as someone has any kind of genuine sense of redemption or need to change, you know you're not dealing with a psychopath. Now you will get psychopaths who will pretend that they are remorseful and they're apologetic and they're sorry for what they did. But it's very interesting. The way they say sorry is quite different. It'll be some. If you actually get them to say sorry, they will do things like, okay, sorry, and they look down. Or they'll somehow project the pathology back on you. Look, I'm sorry, deal with it, okay? Okay, what are we having for dinner? You know what I'm saying? Or it'll be, look, I'm sorry, can we just move on? I don't want to hear about this anymore. That's how they say sorry. If you get an apology from them, which is highly unlikely, but it means no more than when they show affection. It's just the facade. Now, so you really need to be in a long-term relationship with a person, working with them, or having studied them, say you're a politician with a long career, and seeing these or working with someone for a long time, or being a neighbour or something, or related to them. And if they show these demonstrable traits over a long period of time, then you can start to consider that you're dealing with a psychopath. But like one swallow does not a summer make. They have to be consistent in their predatorial intent. They have to be like, we were all capable of being complete jerks and creeps. We all done it. The difference between us and a psychopath is we give a shit, and that's the fundamental difference. We actually give a shit that we've done something, and we want to get out. We want to make amends somehow. A psychopath doesn't give a shit, and a psychopath doesn't want to make amends.
So you talk about the proto psychopath, the people that somehow have been conditioned or pushed into that. How close can they get to actual psychopathy, and is there a way to turn them back?
Oh, absolutely, they can be turned back, and absolutely they can be cured. They will become, the proto-psychopath will nearly always be, in many cases, a product of environment, background, family conditioning. It's classic nurture versus nature situation. The proto-psychopath could have been exposed to sexual abuse as a child, from a relative, from a member of the clergy, from a school teacher, and as a result grows up with a repressed rage to take it out on others, untrusting of people. They can go extremely far. I'll give you a very good example of a proto-psychopath and a psychopath working together, and how the difference between one and the other. In the 1960s in Manchester in England, there was a notorious couple called Ian Brady and Moira Henry. They were known in the media as the Moors murderers. They kidnapped and tortured 5 children, and they buried them at least 5 children, and buried their bodies in the moors around Manchester, in the mountains around Lancashire. Now, Ian Brady, who lived in the building, was a classic psychopath. He was the one who instigated the abductions, filmed and recorded tape recorded the torture of the children, and did all the killing. Moira Hindley, his girlfriend, was a woman who grew up in an extremely dysfunctional home. She was subject to incredible violence, sexual abuse, incest, and by two drunken and crazy parents who were completely the most dysfunctional family you ever came across. Brady, when they were living in the same apartment building, Brady instantly recognized that Moira Hindley had this dysfunctional past, and then set about to, heal her past by being almost like the father figure of the man she desired. Once he had psychological domination and psychological dominion over her psyche, he then tested her. First person they killed, I believe, was a 17-year-old guy called John Kilbride. He strangled him in front of her, and she was shocked at first, but he played the game to make her go along and help him dispose the body. And then every time along this chain, he kept pushing her boundaries and playing on her insecurities and her. She was basically a profoundly uneducated, disadvantaged, and lost soul. Now that doesn't excuse what she did partaking in these murders. She should have went to prison when she did. She died. She lived to be 60 and died in prison of cancer. But she should have been punished for what she did. But having said that, to me, she was a proto-psychopathic mind control slave. She was, if she had met a different kind of man, she would have ended up completely different in her personality. When they were, during the trial, which was an enormous media sensation in this part of the world, there's some very good documentaries and films that I would suggest you check them out. Some good books too, Moore's Murderers. Moira Hindley on the defense stand was playing a tape of a 10-year-old girl called Leslie Ann Downing, I think her name was Downing. She was being tortured by Brady, and as sickening as that was, in the background of the tape, Moira Hindley came into the room and told her to shut up. And this shocked people because, a woman no less, showing no sympathy towards a child who was being sexually, he was actually making pornographic photographs of her. Now, excuse me. Now what happened there was that Brady had made a second copy of the tape. And when he was asked on the witness stand why he made the second copy of the tape, he said, because it was so interesting and I didn't want to lose it. And that is about as perfect an insight as you can get into the psychopathic mind as possible. The only interest that Brady had in these horrific crimes was purely as a recreational thing. And he made a copy of the tape because it was quite different than the tapes of the other children. When this was going on the stand in the courtroom, Moira Hindley was asked by, when she heard the tapes, by the prosecuting barrister, how does this make you feel? She turned around and said, oh my God, I'm ashamed. What had happened was she'd literally come out of her proto-psychopathic mind control program while listening to this tape in the dock, in the courthouse. And that was the difference between Moira Hindley and Ian Brady. She was a proto-psychopath who had been brought to this point through a terribly dysfunctional childhood, a family background, coupled with the mind control, gaslighting and crazy making which Ian Brady performed upon her. And that's the difference between the two.
So what I kind of hear you saying is that one of the steps to start the healing of a proto-psychopath is actually confrontation, somehow making them confront their own deeds.
Yes, it's almost like a form of behavioral therapy. These people are capable of redemption and they do feel empathy, but they repress it deeply inside them because their neuroses causes them to block out the empathy that should be there anyway. It becomes an almost de facto justification for their behaviour. It's the most unfortunate rationalization because it will often lead them to a miserable life. And these people, they break the law, but otherwise, if they're behaving like psychopaths, an attempt should be made to reform them. And I believe in every case, just about every case, you could reform a proto-psychopath through behavioral therapy in order to get them to confront what they did and show the full impacts of this of their behavior upon victims, and it will change them. Now, in the movie, in Stanley Kubrick's movie A Clockwork Orange, there's a scene where where Malcolm McDowell they're trying to reform him through a sort of an electronic, scientific method of behavioural therapy. And while it's actually going on, he is in shock. But as soon as it's over, he's not. And he says, "I was cured all right." He was a psychopath because once the actual experience of the actual scientific method to cure him was over, he just went back to what he was, a psychopath. So yes, psychopaths cannot be cured. Well, not with current technology. It'd be great if they could, but that's not possible right now. And
one of the things one of the things that we touched upon in the earlier session was the thing about creativity, and from a lot of what you say, I get the feeling that the psychopathic mind is compensating for a lack of creativity. It's as if it's trying to internalize some sort of narrative that is something that normal people can do inherently.
Yes, it's not a compensation driven by a need to feel that experience. It's a compensation undertaken in order to manipulate people. When a psychopath becomes an artist, becomes a musician, they have no originality. They will completely plagiarize and adopt another style of music that already exists. Even if they start writing songs, they tend to be just like very similar to a song they heard. They're not capable of original creative insights because the frontal lobes of their brain, where creativity resides along with dreaming and the processing of emotions, is deficient in them, or it functions in a dysfunctional manner. So that's why they're no good at that. And when they undertake creativity, they go to be an artist, they become a sculptor, a poet, an actor, a musician. You won't get any groundbreaking, any groundbreaking production from that because they're purely plagiarizers. And when I was in the music business, I think I only met one musical psychopath that I can remember. And he could play guitar quite well, but he could only play guitar as long as it sounded like what he learned from a songbook. It was not, he couldn't combine the original.
There's also this underlying theme of fear and response to fear. One of the things that seem to be in many of the narratives in popular culture as well is that they instigate fear in others, but they do not seem to feel it themselves. Do they actually have any what can give them a rush? Can they actually feel fear in a way that normal people do?
No, they feel a different. It's not fear. It's the kind of. It's a different kind of fear. It's like imagine a lizard sitting on a rock in the desert and it sees the shadow of an eagle coming overhead to snap him, and he makes a run for it. The lizard makes a run for it. Well, that's a fight or flight response. That's the kind of fear they have. It's not like us. The psychopath isn't running away going, oh my god, I'm doomed, or anything like that. They're just saying, gotta get out of here. Now, they're so fearless. This is why they can pass lie detector tests. They don't have fear in the same way we do. Because if you listen to a non-disordered person's concept of fear, it's based on the eventual consequences of the behavior. If you are being interrogated by the police for stealing a shop, your fear responses will be triggered by the consequences of you potentially going to prison for a long time. If you're stealing from somebody, the same thing. You're worried about losing your job if you're stealing from your employer. A psychopath is completely different. Their response to that would be, well, they don't care about the consequences because they live in the feral moment. So there would not be any issues with that. So their fear is very, very different, completely different. And they also get a kind of an arrogant, cocky rush from pulling a fast one in those situations. They enjoy getting away with it. It feeds their God complex. It feeds their narcissism, this belief that they can do whatever they want and get away with it. And it's a big joke. We see that a lot with political psychopaths. They almost rub it in people's faces. They almost, or you have these CEOs of these corporations who they've lost vast amounts of money or they've squandered it, and then they get like the banks, they get a huge taxpayer bailout, and then they glibly pay themselves their $10 million bonus, and they do it with a smirk on their face. So many of them have that smirk, and that smirk is like, it's really just an auto-feral impulse. That's really what's behind there, is them laughing at you. Where a normal person in that situation would be like, they might even consider giving the money back. But normally they would be like, yeah, this is going to really come back to haunt me. The psychopath never thinks that way. Their version of fear is a flight or fight, auto-feral response.
You also touch upon, you talk a lot about the walk away, that when you have been in some sense a victim to a psychopath, that the only thing to do is walk away. Could you elaborate a bit on that? Because sometimes that must be quite difficult in the circumstances, especially when you talk about very close relationships. Well, let's say family relationships or partnerships or things involving family and kids, and maybe even very important business relationships. How can you just walk away?
Well, you don't just walk away. It's a very difficult process. But you immediately got to, if it's something like it's a close family situation or a business thing, you immediately begin an exit strategy. If you identify that a psychopath within the structure is the problem, is the issue, because there's going to be no resolution there. You cannot work with them. There will be no mediation. There will be no meeting them halfway. The psychopath also does not like when you walk away because they've lost control over you. So people who are looking for an element of satisfaction from the experience, the best thing they can actually do in order to kind of irritate and annoy the psychopath, and it really does irritate and annoy them, is to no contact ever again. No further contact. Do not engage, do not comply. Now, in a situation with your children, you have children who are a psychopath. Well, if you have a child, in most countries you're legally obligated until that child reaches adult age, 18 or whatever, to take care of it. But you would have to make amends for the fact that you cannot be dealing with this kid as an adult, because they will never leave home. They will always be coming back looking for money, bailing them out of legal trouble, and so on. Now, you could implement a kind of Pavlovian conditioning where maybe they get into trouble with the law once and you bail them out, and then you say to them, if the police come knocking on this door again, or you're in financial trouble, don't come to me. I'll have nothing to do with you ever again. And you may, through this Pavlovian conditioning, get them to stop that behavior in relation to you. They won't stop it in relation to others. And they may move their machinations onto a different frequency or a different level of approach. If you're in a long-term, well, you're married to a psychopath, you've got to get away. Now, if you have children with them, that brings up all kinds of legal issues. You're going to have to work them out. But if you, the ideal solution is no contact ever again. It works beautifully. It's a liberating. involved with groups that deal with people who've escaped.
Oh, hang on. I think the connection just did a little jump. Can you take it back?
Sorry? Are you lost me?
Yeah, the connection is.
Okay. Am I back?
Yes, I think you are.
No, I deal with a lot of people who've been through this experience, particularly married to them, or in a relationship, a romantic relationship with a psychopath. And the no contact ever again thing is something that they constantly talk about how fantastic it feels. They get back their dignity, they get back their strength, and they start to believe in themselves again, and it's almost a spiritual transformation from this. In fact, many people do come out of psychopathic experience almost spiritual. Even if they were atheists beforehand.
Yeah.
It's very interesting dynamic.
That's also something that I would like you to go into a little bit deeper. But first, I would like to get back to the whole thing about whether or not it's possible to. Is it at all possible to have a relationship where you can retain some control? What I'm really asking is, can you make a relation with any type of psychopath work?
I really don't know. I can't imagine a situation where you could. Even in military, militaries don't want anything to do with them either because they make terrible soldiers. Now you'd think at first that a psychopath would be an ideal individual to have on the battlefield fighting your wars with you because they would just kill without remorse. But that's not what happens when a psychopath is in a combat situation. As soon as the battle starts, they sneak off and they start looting homes, raping female civilians, or very common, going back to the front lines, going back to the headquarters and stealing their comrades' stuff. It's very common. And the First World War was when this was really recognised. British troops who had been shot at dawn. It was for cowardice. But when you look at it, and some of them were shell-shocked, many of them were shell-shocked and put up the wall for no reason at all, and they had a nervous breakdown. But many of them too were obviously psychopaths. When you look at their records, they had done this numerous times. They had just basically left the battlefield and started stealing their friends' stuff, and started even looting officers' quarters while the battle was going on. And that's why psychopaths, even in the military system, they give you a gun to their head, they're still no good. So I can't see a situation where you could create a useful psychopath, because that's even the idea of them being in a battle is a myth. They'll be useful in an insane society where the values of the society are completely warped. So you need psychopaths to actually become the physical and psychological engine of that warped society. But that society is ultimately doomed. So my work does not go into reforming or helping psychopaths, because that doesn't interest me, and I don't think it ever will interest me. I'm only interested in the victim and the victim experience and what people can get from that. Apart from that, what happens to psychopath, my honest thing is that I don't care. I just don't care.
What about is there a range of psychopaths that are not yet haven't discovered their own ailment, their own situation, their own nature?
I don't think so. The ones I've spoken to tell me the same story. When they were children, as young children, they were growing up, and they were kind of aware they were different than other kids. Now, many of us, particularly creative people, we grew up knowing that about ourselves as well. But the demo is quite different. For psychopaths, the childhood experience is quite different. They don't know why others like them. They don't understand why other kids cry when their pets die. They don't understand why they cry when their grandmother dies. It's very strange to them. They don't understand this experience. They don't understand the concept of bonding, love, and emotions. So what happens when they get to a certain age, usually around puberty? This is why we must also sort of step into their shoes for a while. This is why I believe that the civil rights of psychopaths should be protected as well until they've done something. This is why I'm vehemently against anyone trying to use public policy to punish psychopaths or to make a database of them. If the criminals have done something, yes, otherwise leave them alone. But my attitude is that they should be left alone. One of the reasons is they make a cognitive decision when they're about 12 to 13 years old. They say to themselves, look, I'm not like anyone else. There's something wrong with me here. What do I do about it? I'm not going to, do I kill myself? Do I bottle myself up for the rest of my life? No. So what they do is, they say to themselves, okay, listen, I've got something here wrong with me, but I can turn it to my advantage. And they learn how to manipulate. They become sexually active quite young, particularly the females. And they will discover that there's a power element in that, and they can get things with that. So that's how the cycle begins. And it just becomes a parasitic lifestyle of manipulation and using and abuse. And that's how they are. And they develop, it's almost like they have a psychic puberty in that way. They have an experience that the rest of us don't have, where they come to an epiphany about their own condition. But it's probably the only time in their whole lives that they actually have a moment of self-realization. And once they process that, it's just business from that point on.
But you seem to imply that there's some that remain, you can't really say normal, but
inactive.
Yeah, inactive. What makes them escalate? What makes them take those steps of becoming more and more extreme in their predatory behavior?
The rewards. There's financial rewards, there's financial gains. They get a rush from it too. They get extremely excited. When a psychopathic individual ends one relationship, a romantic relationship, and begins another, they cannot
Oh shit. Oh, bugger.
with they're charged, they're absolutely reborn. It's very interesting, and this is where that whole idea of the Irish fairy, the Lian and She, who's reborn by destroying people. It's the same, that's where that comes from. I'm absolutely convinced of it. This psychopath is literally energized when they destroy or pull a fast one. And suppose you were a psychopathic cult leader, you moved into a cult or any kind, or even a political organization.
You fell out again, Thomas. I think I'm just going to try and stop it and restart it, because I have a lot of lag now. Hang on.
I'm back! Is that better?
Yeah. I think it was Skype that did some bleeding. Sometimes it does that memory bleed thing when it's been running a bit. Where did I lose you? I lost you when you were about to talk about...
When a psychopath infiltrates an organization.
Yes, and you were about to talk about... you were mentioning things about the Irish mythos.
Yeah. Okay, let me just okay. Okay. When a psychopath enters a workplace, an organization, a political party, you'll often find that they're not among the founding members. They will see an up-and-coming organization or group, and then they will evaluate and recognize the potential it has to serve them, and how they can gain from being a part of it. Anything from dipping in financial access to members of the opposite sex, or in many cases an ego thing, and also career building. So the psychopath will see something that's probably on the way up, and will then join it, and then will, through incredible flattery, manipulation, and just probably being driven by their high levels of testosterone, their fearlessness, will soon rise to the top or become a leading figure in that organization or entity. And then they'll begin to take it over, and then they'll start to craft the entire organization as a cult of personality around them. and it becomes an extension of them, which feeds them, and ultimately focuses all minds who are in the organization and watching the organization, influenced by it, etc., he'll use the psychopath will use the organization as almost a conduit or a focal point towards him. So his ego is pushed to the fore, or her ego. When this happens in the organization, the psychopath, just like in a relationship, once it has attained what it wants, will play the game for a while, but will always be looking for a potential upgrade, a better opportunity, a way to move up to the next level, to get beyond the current operation or organization or entity or group or revolutionary movement they're in. But before that, they will do things like they will threaten to leave. That'll be a common one. They will threaten to leave and say, I can't deal with the stress anymore. And what they're doing is they're testing the loyalty of the followers to stand by them and support them. They are testing the addiction that they have created within the organization. They'll say things like, I'm having a moral crisis or something like that. I don't think I can do this anymore. And the psychopath will then wait for everyone to say, come back, don't leave us, you know, the organization is lost without you. Then the psychopath will come back. The next way the psychopath will test the boundaries of the followers will also then be to do something like align themselves with a no-no, or, you know, kill a sacred cow which is around the ethos of the organization. Suppose the organization, you know, is against whale hunting. The psychopath might suggest that maybe we should support limited whale hunting in certain areas in order to deal with an overpopulation of whales. And there'll be some revulsion, and those people will leave, but it's not too much. He's not asking for a return to whale hunting, but he's testing the boundaries. And once that's done, he knows that in the organization, the followers who are left are the hardcores who will follow him to the end. Now, at this point, the psychopath will then be looking to get out to something much bigger. He'll be looking to move into politics. He'll be looking to move into media. He'll be looking into making a personality for himself or herself, making some money from this. And then he will begin, or she will begin, secretly negotiating behind the scenes with possibly, if it's something from an alternative background, he or she will be organizing and meeting in a clandestine way with a mainstream organization. And then suddenly, out of the blue, this individual will renounce all their connection to this organization, will then insult and degrade, belittle and mock the followers that he once stood by. It'll come out of the blue, out of nowhere. He'll be talking about, we must save the whales on a Friday, and a Monday morning he'll be saying, oh, I've just gone to work for the whaling industry, and I think I could do better work working for I think I can really help the cause working for the whaling industry, because I can actually stop it from the inside. And it was just a way of him fishing for a job and fishing for more money. And the organization and its followers were just a conduit from obscurity to fame. And they were used and manipulated in order to get that. And he will then trash the organization, or she will trash the organization she just left. And the followers will be shattered. They'll be psychologically shattered. They'll assume that something has happened to this person, that a gun has been held to their head. But they don't understand that they're dealing with the pathology of a psychopath, that the persona of the sensitive anti-whale hunting activist that they loved and adored for a couple of years was just a character on a stage he'd invented. So they do it in an organization the exact same way they'll do it in a relationship.
How then, because you mentioned that there is almost a personal spiritual awakening when you've been in a situation like this and you move through it. How do you mean that enlightens the individual? Can you elaborate on that a bit?
I don't know whether it's a chemical change in the body. I don't know if it's a form of rationalization. I don't know if it's a form of has a bigger purpose, that the world, that their life is far more meaningful. Now this is when they fully recovered now, that their own personal life and their own personal life journey is far more meaningful than what the ego can supply. And it's almost like their experience with the psychopath, and I'm talking about all psychopathic experiences here, I'm talking about a relationship, or a government, or even in a church, even in a religion. You have been taken to the ultimate level of the ego. And the ultimate level of the ego is almost like self-destruction. And the psychopath has taken you to that point. And you've tested the limits of the ego. You've tested the limits of your ego. And the only thing beyond that is the higher self. And it becomes a doorway. It becomes a portal. A lot of my artwork revolves around images of doorways, portals, and things like that. And that's the way it becomes. It becomes almost like the Stargate, if you want to use that analogy. A transcendental pathway, the alchemical highway into your higher self, and it just happens to people when they go through this experience. I'm not sure of the reason, but it does happen, and it is a real thing. And these people are when they get over the experience and they rationalize it properly and don't spend the rest of their lives hating the psychopath, they will actually have a pretty amazing life experience from that point on, because they've looked into they've actually put their head through the gates of hell, and they've survived it, and they come to the rational realization that the reason they survived it is because something within them they didn't know they had, some part of their consciousness or some part of their being was able to get them out of that. And then they also start remembering things, how their intuition was telling them all along and in the early days that this person's bad dude, get away from this person, or this organization will destroy you. But they didn't listen to their intuition because they gave precedence to their ego. So they discovered the incredible power of intuition. They recognized how they can harness and use it. And that leads to, knowing where that intuition came from. It's almost like they leave the chrysalis and become a butterfly in a spiritual sense. And it's happened to me, and I'm proud to say it. I'm delighted to say it, and people can think of me what they like, because I know I'm actually a very grounded guy. But I'm actually quite a different person than I used to be. I was Mr. Hardcore Reductionist Science. All people who believe in a spiritual dimension to the human experience, they're in denial, or they're just using it to deal with grief. And now I realize the fallacy of that thought process that was contained in me. And a lot of that came from my own reaction to Catholicism. But nevertheless, that's how I felt. And it changed me completely. Do you want me to go into why and how that happened?
I'd like you to maybe touch upon how you feel about that happening now, especially in relation to all the other things. It's very much as if there is everyone is talking about the Grand Awakening, but this is something very everyday life related. This is something that people can actually use and relate to. They might not be able to relate to big issues and huge topics about the economy and the weather and doomsday or not doomsday and all these things, but something as normal and localized as everyday psychopaths and getting through the experience of evil. How do you relate to the whole thing of that happening now? Do you think that's important?
Yeah, I think it's a collective experience, and there's an element of the collective unconscious coming on here. In Eastern philosophy, particularly in traditions like the Nat tradition of India, which is something I'm very interested in, their belief in the psychopath is that it's an evolutionary process. It's to do with almost like karmic cycles. I don't necessarily buy the whole karmic idea myself. I just think it's another form of guilt or something. But having said that, they in these traditions, and certainly in the Sindar traditions in India and in the Indian subcontinent and that region, there's a belief that psychopaths manifest within your life in order to make you go through the experience that you put other people through. And I think a lot of people who go through the experience realize that as well, because it makes you very empathic and makes you incredible. I've always been an empathic person, but I'm deeply empathic now. And it's not always a good thing. It can be quite painful, but it's also, it can be good, and it can be quite beautiful in the creative sense. So, you know, it's a trade-off. It's something worth happening anyway. You experience the fuller richness of emotions, and even the bad ones. You know, when you go through this experience, let me tell you, it's like what happens when they say what happens when you die and that tape recording is played, and you see all the things you did and all the people you hurt. Well, that's what happens to you in this experience, and the shadow that you have denied, the negative aspects of your behavior, of your psychology, well, it comes at you like a freight train and it runs you over. But that's it. So you have a tremendous personal, evolutionary and spiritual and psychological growth from the experience. And that's why I often say to people, those of us who've been through these experiences, when we get out the other side, we're actually kind of glad we went through them, because our lives are far more richer, fuller and meaningful now. And I think it is a part of a grand awakening. I think it is. I think there's, and nothing happens in nature by accident. When we talk about psychopaths, we're not talking about 1 in a million. We're talking about roughly 4% of the population in Western society. So that's not a tiny mistake or an obscure mutation. It's a lot of people over the world, and that nature wouldn't put that many out there, or you know, the cosmos or whatever you want to call it, the Godhead wouldn't put that many out there in society if it didn't serve a grand function. And my belief is that grand function is the grand agenda of this is. You lost me.
Yes, I did. On a very.
Did you get me with finishing with social order?
I got up until the conclusion, so no, I lost the good stuff there.
Okay, well I'll start. I'll just do that bit again.
Do you have anything running aside?
Nothing.
Nothing? No, me neither.
Nothing.
It's very weird that we keep falling out.
It is getting very hot here, so I'm just wondering if that's affecting it.
Yeah, it could be that our graphic cards are being punished a bit. I just think that was extremely important what you just touched upon and
okay, I'll do it again. Is this part of the Grand Awakening? Absolutely, I think it is. There's a vast numbers of psychopaths out there. Now, they're not all completely horrible. There's a different frequency of psychopathology in each one of them, ranging from a shifty individual all the way up to a tyrannical despot. But we're talking about 4% of the human population here. Nature would not make a mistake with 4%. We're not talking about 1 in a million. We're talking about 1 in the 20s, 1 to 22 to 25 of every person in Western society being psychopathic to some degree. That absolutely is not a mistake. That has happened for a reason, and it's happening for a reason that I believe is to elevate the human consciousness by coming into contact with these entities, with these people, these puzzling people, and as a result developing a better, a more introspective, a more intuitive and a more consciously elevated society to replace the one that we currently exist in. Collectively and individually, we're having a fire lit on their backside by these psychopaths, both in relationships, the workplace, and in politics and in media and in government. And that is a grand plan that's implemented either through natural functions or through an evolutionary impulse, or more likely, from my own perspective, a reaction to our own consciousness, our own polluted modern consciousness that we have today, our broken psyche, which is the Western man is currently burdened with. we have manifested through our conscious intent this experience, both individually and collectively, and it's an evolutionary impulse, and that's why it happened. And it's not a mistake, and it's not an accident, and it's something that once you get through it, you will embrace it because you'll realize it happened for a reason, and the reason was that you needed it. And the reason why it's happening, we call this the Great Awakening, and this political breakdown. The reason why that's happening is collectively, as the human consciousness, in terms of our collective psyche, we need it because we have not come to terms with our shadow, and we need to do that fast. And this is how evolution happens. And this is why psychopaths are here, and why we need them, and why we should come to terms with this experience, because it's sink or swim. We have to. This is a pivotal point in human development, and we have to confront our shadow. And the psychopaths have come here to hold up the mirror to us and say, this is what you really are, and that you will not survive if you don't change. And this is why we're changing.
That's awesome. That was awesome. One small thing that I would like you to touch upon before I think we've got enough material to actually start working is I wanted to talk about the whole symbolism, and especially the fact that in your art you have, as you mentioned, you have a lot of things related to doorways, parting of whales, a lone figure going back to nature, and then you have images like the cuckoo and the raven. These images seem to be very much represented in your artwork. Do you think there's some relation to are you channeling a zeitgeist of some sort? Are you?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I can go with that. Yeah, I am, absolutely. I'm definitely a conduit. It's not coming from me. Well, it's not coming from this version of me. It's not coming from this biological, 46-year-old guy, Irish guy, slightly chubby. It doesn't come from that. It comes from that observer behind me, what's back there. That's where it comes from. That's where it's coming from, and it's coming through. And that's why so much of my art is predictive. Unknowingly, I have painted things that have actually come through. I've actually painted scenes that I've walked into. I've actually painted experiences that have happened a year or so later. Don't ask me why it happens, but it's predicted. It's probably part of the whole synchronistic thing. And I totally embrace that. Now, before we go into that, I just want to mention something that ties into a lot of my own personal awakening. How I went from being Mr. Cynical, Mr. Ordinary, one-dimensional, spiritually speaking, into what I am now. And it revolves around 9/11. And you're the first person outside people I'm close to that I've told this story to. And on the day of 9/11, I just started working for a company in Dublin. It was the Irish subsidiary of Marsh & McLennan, who were an American human resources and communications group, and I was working in the communications part of the Irish, subsidiary in Dublin. And it was like the second day on the job, I think, and I didn't have my internet hooked up. And all I knew about the 9/11 attacks was that the occasional person was walking by and saying, there's been a plane crashed into one of the Twin Towers, and I was getting constant updates and the tower fell. But my experience of 9/11 was quite unique in that I saw no television until late that night when I saw the footage played back. As the events happened, I was almost not oblivious to it, but I couldn't really know what was going on. I was also in my first or second day in the job, so I was a little bit kind of nervous when you start a job. Now, it just so happens that the American office, we were getting updates all day, and eventually by the end of the day we were told it doesn't look good. The first plane had crashed into the North Tower, which is where our offices were located, and they killed 90 or so of the people I was working with in the communications department of Marsh & McLennan. And that was pretty bad as it was. It was just surreal how I just started a job and a whole bunch of people, in the New York department of where I was working were killed. Now, When this happened, the office was completely destroyed, but they had been saving all their work onto the mainframes, which was located uptown somewhere in Fifth Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. So until the moment of their death, these people were working on actual projects, communications projects. And these had to be taken over by the various departments around the world, including the Dublin office. And I was working in corporate communications as a graphic designer. And so the files for some of their documents were sent to me, and I was literally opening documents that were created by people at the moment of their death, which was surreal enough. But when we opened the documents, what I witnessed, I'll never forget as long as I live. I've worked in corporate communications for about 10 years prior to that, about 9 years prior to that. And there's very specific colour guidelines, there's very specific presentation guidelines. Certain colours and certain layouts affect people in terms of when you want to buy and sell things. Mm-hmm. I've never ever seen PowerPoint slides, Quark Express files, presentations, documents, trifolds that were black. These things were black. They were very similar to the colour scheme, to the colour of my book. They were black, dark grey with the occasional red. I've never seen a presentation like that in my life. And this is what these designers were working on when the plane crashed into them and they met their fate. The only reason I can think of, and I know for a fact they were indulging that colour scheme, is because they had a collective cognitive precognition of what was about to befall them. And that changed me very, very deeply. I was never the same person after that. I started to realise that there was something, this precognitive stuff. There was no other explanation that they would choose black. I couldn't trace down documents or anyone in any other office to know why why this colour scheme was black. But it was, and it was surreal. It made no sense. It was a portent of doom, and they probably didn't know why. And this ties into the whole aspects of synchronicisticism. And where these symbols and where these things come from, and they come from outside us and they tell us what's about to happen, or else they may even actually create reality. And I think there's an element of that going on as well in artwork. Now, my own art, in terms of the symbolism, there are common motifs which run through it. They're not conscious, they're unconscious, but they help me deal with the aspect that I'm going through, because to me, when I work on a painting, it's not it's not, aesthetic for the sake of aesthetic. I'm actually working through something, and I'm carrying that experience onto the canvas with paints and with pigment. And the raven is a very common motif in all my artwork going right back. I don't know why I'm obsessed with ravens, but the raven is a bird that fascinates me. I've actually got some kind of connection to them. I can talk them down out of trees. Ravens will come up to me very close, completely wild ones now. I can say things to them in the trees, and they will actually start, squawking back to me. I don't know why I have this connection with ravens. It seems to come from when I was a teenager. I walked into a field when I was on holidays in the countryside, and a whole bunch of them lifted up and flew all around me, coming very close to me. And ever since then, I don't know, I've felt a sense of kinship with the raven. I don't know why. I just think it's a magnificent bird, and I want to celebrate its existence through my art. Another aspect would be, as you said, the cuckoo. Well, the cuckoo is a psychopathic bird. The cuckoo lays its eggs in other birds' nests. The eggs hatch and they kill the other birds' fledglings. And then the poor sparrow, finch, or whatever it is, has to then feed this bird that's much bigger than it. And it's a psychopathic aspect. Another reason I like birds too is because the bird, the expression bird brain, well, the bird really does represent the link between our reptilian brain and our mammalian brain, where we're moving away from self-preservation and selfishness towards taking care of the young. And birds generally, they mate for life, so we have the bonding, and that leads us to the mammalian brain. So birds are not only a transition between earth and sky, but in a allegorical sense within the human brain, they're a transition, for me anyway, between the reptilian or complex and the upper mammalian complex, and then on to the frontal cortex, as to make us the modern human that we are. So that plays in there. As for gates and portals, absolutely fascinated with the idea. When I was a teenager, some friends of mine were camping up in the Dublin Mountains in a place called Massey's Mansion, which was an old castle or something. And what remains of it were still some Gothic gates that sat in the woods. And it would come from the city centre. I'd never seen complete darkness. I'd never experienced that. We were trying to find a way to the campsite.
Why?
It's excellent. Again, really.
Take a t-shirt, please find your t-shirt. Well, you can turn on the heat, the power of the heat by turning this. Let's the pump on, by the way. Yeah.